a minute. Dr. Tajik Hebuch, I welcome you to this EDU talk session at the Syed Ehsan Ali and Syed Maratib School of Education at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. Thank you for joining us today. I am Gulab Khan, your host for the session today. In fact, it gives me immense pleasure welcoming and introducing Dr. Mir Afzal Tajik to you all. Dr. Tajik will speak on his work on leadership conceptions and metaphors in Pakistan and Tajikistan. Dr. Tajik is an associate professor at the Nazarbayev University Graduate School of Education in Astana, Kazakhstan. He obtained his PhD from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, Canada, and Master of Education from the Aga Khan University's Institute for Education Development in Pakistan. So before joining Nazarbayev University in September 2016, Dr. Tajik worked as an associate professor and held leadership positions, including interim dean, associate dean, head of graduate programs, and director outreach programs at AQUID. He has also led AQUID's capacity building program in Afghanistan and Tajikistan. At Nazarbayev University, Dr. Tajik has served as director of PhD in education program and is currently leading a number of research projects funded by both national and international organizations. He brings over 30 years of experience in education with research interests in teacher education, educational leadership and management, school improvement, and community-based education. He is the recipient of AQU's Award for Sustained Excellence in Scholarship of Application 2009. Before Dr. Tajik takes mic from me, let me share the structure of the session today. First, Dr. Tajik will talk about leadership conceptions and metaphors in about 20-25 minutes, and that will be followed by question and answers. So please hold your questions until then, or you can type your questions in the chat box, which Dr. Tajik will respond to when he's finished his presentation. Or Dr. Tajik, it's up to you if you would like to take questions as you go along, it is your choice. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Tajik.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Gulab Khan. Hello, everyone again. Thank you, Gulab, for your kind introduction. And I also thank the management, your colleagues, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all. Without taking any further time, let's begin our talk. I will be talking about conceptualization educational leadership through metaphors in two countries, Pakistan and Kazakhstan. It's needless to say why we talk about leadership, why leadership is so important. You all know, look around the world, what is happening in different parts of the world, what is happening in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, Middle East, elsewhere in the world. Don't go that far, look around, our own country, look at the noise that is going on, most of the time. In this noise, do you hear the voice of a leader? Or we only hear the noise of, the dividers, the blackmailers, the dealers. Many people who are, involved in this noise. When I say noise, I don't necessarily refer to the political situation. I refer to the general noise that we can hear everywhere. So who are the people behind this noise? Many of them are leaders. They have positions, leadership positions. They use that position to whatever they want to do. But do you see them that they have the kind of leadership that the position demands, the position requires? If no, what are the reasons? Why the people who hold these positions do not deliver the leadership? So where's the issue in simple terms? There can be many answers, of course, but one of the issues is, how we conceptualize leadership, how we understand leadership, influences the way we enact leadership. So let's go through some discussions, how we conceptualize and why we conceptualize the way we conceptualize. So in this short presentation, I will talk about the context of this study. This talk is based on a longitudinal study that I have conducted, in which we'll try to see how leadership is defined, what are some of the theoretical underpinnings of leadership that are relevant to us, and challenges in understanding those philosophical underpinnings, and what could be an alternative approach to better understand leadership, to better conceptualize leadership. And also, I will also present a comparative analysis of leadership metaphors in Pakistan and Kazakhstan, how master's students, graduate, postgraduate students conceptualize leadership. So let me give you a very short context of this study. Dr. Gulab knows, and I don't know if I know anyone else in the audience. I have worked in Pakistan for a long time. I have taught in a university there. And I have also been working in Kazakhstan for the last 5 years. So I teach educational leadership courses. I teach Introduction to Educational Leadership. I teach Strategic Leadership and Management. I teach Pedagogical Leadership. These are different courses I teach. And I teach this in Master of Education program that had a specialization in educational leadership and management in Pakistan. And also we have a master's program, we call it Master of Science in Educational Leadership in Kazakhstan. Many things are common between these two programs. Although there's no partnership between these two universities, probably they don't know each other, but I find very interesting commonalities in the programs they offer. So while I was teaching these educational leadership courses, I also kind of started a research, a qualitative research on how students conceptualize leadership. So who are the students in this program? They are primarily principals, vice principals, current or aspiring leaders, teacher educators, and education managers in both the context. So the data was collected through leadership images created by these students. They were asked in one of the courses to actually draw and explain what a leader like in their eyes. What is the image of a leader, in their mind? And also that was followed by small group projects of constructing leadership metaphors to describe the leader they were inspired by, or the leader they think is a role model for them. And also, as part of the assignment, they wrote reflective essays on the personal, contextual, and cultural factors that influence leadership. And also, there were some semi-structured interviews with small, selected, small sample of students. So this is the context. This is where the empirical evidence comes from. So before I go into the data, let me just share with you very quickly the history of leadership. Where has leadership started? I'm sure many of you, if I'm not mistaken, many of you are students at LUMS and you have an MPhil in educational leadership program. So I believe you have studied these theoretical underpinnings of leadership. If you look at the the literature, we see that the concept of leadership has existed not only in human beings, but also in animals, in birds, in other, bees or insects. How do we confirm that there is a leadership in outside the human context? If you pay attention to how birds fly, you certainly notice that yes, there is some kind of coordination amongst them. They don't speak, they don't tell us who is the leader, but certainly there is a concept of leadership there. And also you see how experience or elder animals groom the younger ones, how they teach them how to find out the source of food, how to teach them, how they teach them where to hunt, where to go. They know the climate, they know the weather changes. This means there is some kind of leadership going on there. In human being, it is very easy. We all know that we are we have this genetic predisposition to dominate in social hierarchy in which we live. Everybody plays a leadership role, whether you have a formal position or not. You have a leadership role in your family, in your society, in the circle of your friends, in your classroom, everywhere you go. We do enact some kind of leadership. So, do we understand leadership in the same way? Definitely not. We all have our own ways of looking at leadership and leaders. Yes, we may agree on certain definitions, certain notions of leadership, but we certainly have our unique way of looking at leadership as well. So if you look at the literature, you can find over 350 definitions. If you read Bush and Glover, I'm sure they have discussed this in great length, how the diverse understanding exists around the world when it comes to the notions of leadership. And therefore, because there are diverse understanding of leadership, the concept of leadership has been quite contested in different times, including the present time. There is a lot of debate around who is a leader, what makes a leader a great leader or successful leader. There is a lot of debate around that. So in the context of this study, when I say leadership, I do not refer to positional leadership only, people who hold formal leadership position. I see leadership as a practice, as a social practice that is widely distributed and engaged by a range of people who are working in an organization, in a firm, in a family, in an institution. Whether they realize it or not, they do have a certain leadership role. So in that context, when we see leadership as a social practice, then we are talking about vision, we are talking about values, we are talking about influence, we are talking about processes rather than position. Okay, so going back to the theories, I won't dwell too much on this. I just want to, have a quick thought on this. We can find so many theories of leadership, and this list is not a full list. Certainly, I have just picked up a few of them, which I usually use in my courses. So you can see how the theories have evolved from the great man theory or great person theory to the distributed leadership. You could see that there is evolution, there is a paradigm shift from from a heroic leadership that, the great man theory says that the leader is always born. There is always a hero. He comes and fix the situation when others are struggling. But if you go to the last one, distributed leadership, that is quite opposite of that. That says that no, there are no heroes. Leaders are not necessarily born. They are developed. If they get the opportunity, everybody is a leader. Everybody has the potential to become a leader, provided that that person gets the kind of environment where the leadership traits, the leadership characteristics, behavior skills are developed. Okay, so what is the issue with these theories? The issue I see is, based on my experience of teaching leadership courses, and also as a student in leadership courses, I do remember my experience. I do recall the kind of challenges I used to face in understanding these theories, and also finding the fine line between, one or more theories, and more importantly, relating them to the context where we were working, relating them to the context where I have a leadership role to play, or you have a leadership role to play. That has been, a major challenge for many students, researchers, faculty members who teach, this. Why this is the case? Because most of these theories were developed in a context which is very different than the context we are applying them to. So, the level
looks like there is some network issue at Dr. Tajik's end. I'm not sure if that is the case with everyone. Can you hear Dr. Tajik? Okay, so maybe we can wait for a bit. Maybe his network is down or something. Okay, he got disconnected, it seems.
Alternative approach to understanding leadership. Let me discuss what is some of the other problems with the theories that we have in hand, and we frequently use them in our context. One of the things you may agree or you may disagree with me is how some of these theories romanticize the discourse around leadership, and how they repeat the same assumptions under different term, under different titles. That is also at times it is frustrating, because it ignores the complexities of the social context. So that is the major limitation you can find in some of these theoretical frameworks for leadership. There is also a growing realization that leadership is not a fixed thing, that somebody has developed this theory and people should follow it for the rest of their life. That's not the case. Things are evolving, leadership is evolving, the concept is evolving, and therefore there is a constant need for constructing, deconstructing, and reconstructing the concepts of leadership, approaches to leadership, and leadership styles. And how do we do it? One of the ways, of course, there are many ways to do it, but one of the ways that a number of researchers support is metaphors. why metaphor is relevant in the first place. Metaphor is relevant because when we use metaphors to describe leadership or our notions of leadership, it's not just our theoretical understanding that influences our metaphors. It's also our experiential learning, how we have experienced learning about leadership, how we have experienced enacting leadership in the context where we apply them. And also, the metaphors are grounded in our cultural context. And later on, I will show you how the metaphors are influenced by the socio-cultural context in these two countries. So if you ask what is a metaphor, how you understand a metaphor, in a very simple term, a metaphor is a figurative language, that can be understood from a cognitive perspective as well as a discursive perspective. So from cognitive perspective, metaphors serve as organizing structure and principles of leadership thoughts and experience, how we think, how we perceive reality, how we perceive leadership. Very often, when you are writing about leadership, we think a lot and we express very little. Especially when you are writing your assignments around leadership, you think, and then you write. And then you realize that the amount of thinking that goes on is not coming out in the words that you are putting on the paper. But there is opposite. Sometimes people talk a lot and think very little. So that is another context. So the cognitive perspective provides you some kind of guideline, a framework that how you can articulate what you are thinking in your mind. And also from the discursive perspective, it's to do with the linguistic structure where we are comparing an abstract notion with a concrete thing. So if my metaphor is, for example, a torch, okay, I use a torch for a leader. So my abstract thinking of what a leader is or what leadership is, who a leader is, I'm trying to compare that with a concrete material, that is a torch in my hand. And I'm making this comparison and trying to articulate, express my thoughts. So that is the benefit of using metaphors to explain the abstract concepts through some kind of concrete materials. So in this particular study, as I shared with you earlier, that students were asked to construct and reflect on their leadership metaphors. So students from each country had a long list of metaphors. I have just picked up a few of them from each context. So if you look at the metaphors from Pakistan side, or the students from Pakistan, they very frequently use these metaphors like servant, rahbar, payambar, masiya, captain. By captain, they don't mean Imran Khan, but it's a general term they use. A captain of a ship, captain of a plane. Shepherd, calling. Leadership is a calling. It's a secret calling. A leader is a missionary. A leader is a sunlight. A leader is a harfane mola. So these are all the metaphors the student use to describe their image of leadership. And on the other hand, the Kazakh students, Kazakhstani students, they used, these kind of things, yurt. So I'm not sure how many of you know what yurt is. It's a language that is used here. Let me show you what yurt actually is. So this is a yurt. On this side, you can see how it is constructed. These are wooden strips, pieces of wood, and they construct it, coordinating, weaving these wood. And this is the final shape of it. This is a house. This is a traditional house, which is very common here in this part of the world. It's a portable house. You can fold it, take it to another place wherever you go, and you fix it there. Now you must be wondering what has it to do with leadership. So I will come and explain it. Bridge, Dala Kunarivi. This is again a Kazakh word for Dala is a steppe. It's a field, open space. And Kuniravi is the bell, the whistle. So Kazakh are, nomadic people. Historically, the nomadic people, they used to live, they migrate from one place to another due to the weather conditions. And they used to live in tribes, small tribes. And every tribes would have a whistleblower, a person whose responsibility was to wake people up, wake people to the different risks, to the different, hazards or enemies they would have. And Tian Shan Mountain, that is a famous mountain here. Eagle, Jigit is also a non-positional leadership, a person who does not have any formal position, but the person has a lot of respect because of his or her wisdom, experience, and understanding of the situation. Kolbashi is like a colonel, an army person. So these are the kind of metaphors these students use to describe their leadership. So what is important about these metaphors? Dr. Gulab, how am I doing in terms of time? Please tell me if when my time is over.
Well,
or maybe 2-3 minutes.
you can take 5 more minutes, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if you look at the list of metaphors, what is important here is see how they are, rooted into the socio-cultural context. If you look at the the metaphors from Pakistan, you could see that a lot of them are related to religion or religious characters. Servant, Rahbar, Payambar, Masiya, calling, all are, these are coming from the religious perspective. On the other hand, if you look at the Kazakhstani students' metaphors, they come mainly from the nature, because as I said, these were nomadic people. They have lived closer to the nature, and they claim to have learned a lot of lessons from their experience of interacting with the nature and living in the nature. And Pakistan, not surprising, as you can see that religion is an important factor. It does influence policy decision, education, and day-to-day life in Pakistan. And therefore, the student had this image of leadership from their, religious ideals. Let me go to this slide. So it's okay to have, these metaphors. you can say that, so what? I can have so many metaphors to describe my image of a leadership, my leadership notions. But how would I, theorize that? If the metaphors cannot help you theorize your leadership notions, then there is a limitation. It's not complete. So, but when you engage with this metaphor exercise, it's not just that you randomly pick something and say, this is my metaphor. It doesn't work like that. It's a constant engagement, a lot of thinking. It's constructing, deconstructing, reconstructing your leadership metaphors. And when you go through this process, you identify the leadership concepts. So, for example, youth, what are the leadership concepts there? So the youth, it's a symbol of team building. It's a symbol of strong relationships. It's a symbol of participation by every family member. It's a symbol of unity. This is how youth is developed. This is how the purpose of youth is. So these are the leadership concepts: team building, relationships, unity, participation, democracy, equity. These are the concepts that we deal when we talk about leadership. So the participatory distributed leadership theories are all about these concepts. So this is how you relate. Come to the calling, priest, rahbar. What are the concepts there? Care, compassion, healing, persuasion, values, ethics, integrity. These are all the leadership, components, values, notions that we deal with when we talk about moral leadership, when we talk about ethical leadership from the theoretical perspective. So you could see how you can ground your metaphors in the leadership theories that are out there. Okay, let me. I will share this presentation with Dr. Gulab Khan so he can share with you and you can go through some of the slides. Let me conclude this so we can have some discussions. So this study that has taken a few years, but I could see that the findings, the data that I collected in these two slightly different contexts that has showed that approaching leadership through metaphors can open up an opportunity, into defining, describing, explaining, and painting a more concrete and familiar picture of a leadership. So instead of dwelling too much on trait theory, great man theory, or behavioral theory, if we approach through metaphors first to explain the leadership notions better, and then relate it to theory, I think that might be one of the effective approaches to understand leadership. And also, metaphors can help us move from abstract cognitive discussions and espoused theories of leadership to actually visualizing leadership models in use. How these theoretical underpinnings actually can be visualized in the practical use of leadership, focusing more on the leader's role, focusing more on the leader's practices and approaches. And one of the strengths I see as I have been teaching these courses is in using metaphor exercises, that it allows students as well as faculty not only situate leadership within the personal experiences, cultural values, and contextual realities where leadership is practiced, but it also expands our creativity. How creative we can become in imagining and also creating and rationalizing our leadership models and justify those models focusing on the practices. However, the last thing I would caution you that we cannot romanticize metaphors. We cannot take metaphors as if they do not have any limitations. Every metaphor has a limitation, and we need to be aware of that. But if we exercise, if we engage in this metaphor exercises, I'm sure we will be aware of the limitations as well. So thank you very much. This is what I wanted to share with you, and please do ask questions and share your comments. Over to you, Dr. Gulab.
Dr. Tajik, thank you very much for your presentation, for sharing your work with us. As you were taking us through your presentation, I was continuously thinking along these lines are more like tensions between the models and theories of leadership that come to us from the global north and the very inertial, rigid kind of context that we have here. For example, when we talk about pedagogical leadership, then the larger system is simply not in a position to absorb some of the provisions of pedagogical leadership, right? At least not that's what happens in public sector in Pakistan. But I think using this lens of metaphor, many of the processes that happen in schools, in educational systems can be understood. At least some of the dimensions of pedagogical leadership, maybe in that sense, metaphors can facilitate, some contextualization. So thank you, Dr. Tajik, for your very insightful presentation and your work. The floor is open for questions. So far, you can raise your hand or you can post your question in the chat box. Yeah. But let me then share, put up my question by the time someone has a question. So, Dr. Tajik, you remember we are working on this book. It's an edited book on leadership. And there also we see that for quite some time, countries like Pakistan, leadership was not in the policy discourse. And it is only, after 80s and 90s that we see research coming in, especially, I'm sure you already know about this, Dr. Memon's work on head teachers' role in Pakistan. And then, afterwards we see other, work coming in on leadership in Pakistan. So one of the things that we find in contributions is that these least developed countries, they are now increasingly acknowledging the critical importance of leadership, both at the policy and practice level. So what could be some of the policy guidelines that I think people should keep in mind when they are, for example, designing any leadership program, leadership development program, which I think is in dire need in the country. So what is your take on that in terms of, can metaphors be supportive of policy directions in that light?
Thank you, Dr. Gulab. Yes, I fully agree with you. Leadership was understudied and to a great extent an ignored area, in the educational sphere in Pakistan. And also, if you look at internationally, the literature has, the literature on leadership has also started flowing from the 60s. Most of the seminal work has been done, in the 80s and 90s. Before that, yes, you can find some, some theoretical papers, and most of them are, leadership in the context of business or industries, not necessarily in the educational field. So in Pakistan, yes, there was, when I was doing my PhD in 2000, I started in 2000, it was difficult to find the literature on leadership in Pakistan. The only literature that was available was from, the ID, Dr. Mehman, and a few others who had, some studies. But now it is growing. There is,
Yeah.
I can see a growing interest in LUMS. I'm sure you have this MPhil program. A lot of work is going. ID continues to contribute, and some other, researchers are also in this field. However, how can we make this as a policy, guideline? How can research influence policy? Still, we need to go a long way. These, sporadic studies, most of them end up, in library shelf or students, making reference to them. They have not, we have not been able to get into the top policy makers and share with them our research and then engage them to use the research findings when they are formulating policies. So I think we need more and more policy dialogues. What we do is that, we conduct a study, maximum we publish one article or one chapter out of that, and that's it. But that's, the policymakers, they don't read our articles, they don't read our chapters, they don't have time to do that. So I think we as, not as individual researcher, but as organization, as institution, so LUMS, Aga Khan University, IBS Sakhar, and some other, we need to engage, we need to be proactive, and we need to involve these policymakers, invite them, present to them these research findings, and develop policy briefs and publish them in local newspapers, TV channels. We have so many TV channels in Pakistan. The same story is being repeated again and again and again and again, but there is hardly any discussion, any discourse around educational leadership. So we need to engage media, which is a powerful tool, I think, to influence policymakers. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you, Dr. Tajik. Dr. Hassan, you have your hand raised.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for a very nice presentation. So I have a question. So whenever we are talking about policy making and designing of strategies, do you think that leadership, and more so in education, what is the room of going beyond theoretically or empirically established policies and the role of pure intuition and pure need-based activities which don't have a great foundation in theory and experiment? So what has been your thought on this front?
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Yes, I think practice is as valuable as theory. In fact, more valuable, because practice tells you what works, what doesn't work. Theory tells you what to do, what not to do. But the practical approach to leadership, or practical insights based on experience, is very useful. The question is how we can present them to the policymakers, how we can make them understand that this approach has worked in this particular context. So if it has worked in this one context, the probability is that it may work in another context with similar realities. What happens is when we publish, the journals, we publish in international journals, and the international journals have a particular format, a particular template. They are interested in theorizing leadership. They are interested in theoretical discussion perspectives more than the practical side of it. Yes, you can have practical side, but if your paper doesn't have a strong theoretical foundation, it is difficult to get it published. So, but in reality, when we are dealing with policymakers in a country like Pakistan, certainly we need more practical insights. We need more examples of successful leadership models, how our models have worked, and how they can be expanded to other cities, other contexts.
Yes,
Again, we need to
yes,
engage
yeah.
with them.
Yes. So my perspective was that even if let's say we design an experiment and we look at a sample, let's say even if you look at 100 people, or let's say if you, sorry, not 100 people, let's say 100 schools, the diversity within that small pool of candidates is so wide that if you start matching cases and trying to mimic the scenarios that exist, the sample size will become so small that it is difficult to make a very strong theoretical argument about it. Because if let's say we start matching two cohorts in terms of their educational background, in terms of their demographic, in terms of their regional languages they're speaking, so even within a mohalla, we see that there's a huge divergence and diversity that makes that, in my opinion, limits the sample size also. So that's what I've been thinking for some time, that surely theory and practice has a huge role to play, and it gives more structure to your approach and your findings. But I'm asking this question as a hypothesis, that what is the role of intuition? That are there intuitions which show us in a couple of years' time or in a decade that yes, this intuition leads to some strategy which is very effective, but right now it is not established by theory or empirical evidence.
Mhm. Yes, Dr. Hassan, that is a issue. But look, in terms of sample size, generalization, or representation, you cannot sample 1 million schools in a country. That's not a feasible study. It's not practical. You have to have a manageable sample. And when you do a really rigorous study, if your findings are very well supported by empirical evidence, there are chances of that study being relevant to many other schools in the country. Yes, I understand that every school is different. Every school has a different situation, different realities, but there are many commonalities as well. We cannot rule out the commonalities. So team building, let's say, if you are successful in creating an environment in a school where people work together as a team, there is a team spirit that is driving a school change. It is something, I would say, it may be replicable to many other schools, because after all, the people have certain common dynamics as well, within their individual idiosyncrasies. I think so. We can build on that. Certainly, we cannot just take one model from one place and then plant it in another as it is. We will need to make some adaptation. We will need to make some adjustment.
Okay, Dr. Tariq, there are a couple of questions in the chat box. Maruf is asking, could you please let us know why the study was longitudinal?
Okay, so I studied it in Pakistan when I was working there. So my plan at that time was that I will study 2-3 cohorts, and then I will write the report or publish whatever. But then in 2016 I moved to Kazakhstan. So I found, as I said at the beginning, I found very interesting similarities between the programs that we offer here and the program in Pakistan. So I thought that I would continue the study here as well and then make it a comparative study. So that was the reason for making it longitudinal.
Okay. The next question is from, I think it's a question because it doesn't end with a question mark, but I think there is a how in it. So Malia is asking, I would like to see how we can change metaphors in accordance with local policies and how long does it normally take?
Mm-hmm. That is, the metaphor approach is, it is the primary goal is how we can understand, unpack, articulate the abstract theories using some kind of concrete, familiar, known examples like metaphors. So once we have metaphors which are theorized, which are justified, which can be explained both from practical and theoretical perspective, I'm sure the policymakers would also be interested in knowing about that. So it may be easier for us to engage with the policymakers and explain the notions, the principles that we want them to take into account when they are making policies. If I understood your question, did I answer your question, or I understood it differently?
Yeah. So, Dr. Tajik, next is there's a question around gender. During your research, did you notice any contrast in how gendered the metaphors are?
Yeah, that is interesting questions. Yes, I honestly, when I designed the study, I did have this in my mind, that if there will be any gender related variations in metaphors, but honestly speaking, I didn't see much. Maybe in the data collection, I could have, if I do this study again, certainly I would have a gender perspective, a gender lens to look at it. So I didn't use a gender lens as such when I was doing that. But having said that, yes, there were female students whose metaphors were slightly different than the male students. For example, breeze in Kazakhstan, breeze came from a female student, and the explanation, the essay was very interesting. It does, show how gender plays a role in leadership. But as I said, another study with a gender lens would be worth doing.
Okay, Maruf is asking a second question, but I think you have already responded to it in some ways in terms of theorizing of the leadership. So if there is no further question, maybe we can stop here with this note that in the developing countries in Global South, I think we are always bombarded by these notions, models, theories, coming at us from the Global North, because of, obviously, research is very rigorous and fast-paced there. So what I see something missing here is, and I'm sure your work is definitely, plugs into that a missing part is, once the Global North, conceptions of leadership from the Global North hit the road here in Global South, what emerges out of it? For example, if pedagogical leadership is a theory or a model developed mostly in the, by researchers and practitioners in Global North, when it hits classrooms and schools and educational context in Global South, does it really change its shape in the process? Do we come up with so what is the adaptation that we do here of pedagogical leadership, given that our systems are largely bureaucratic in nature, whereas these notions and models mostly pursue democratic ideals? For example, giving more kind of space and centrality to students and teachers in schools. So what emerges out of it? I think there are blind spots in that sense, in theory, from the Global South, how we are adapting these notions is, and I think metaphors is, I see as a very fertile opportunity to see that adaptation. So with that, if there is no further question, Dr. Tajik, would you like to give any concluding thought, and we can close the session for today?
Thank you, Dr. Gulab. Yes, I think you concluded it very well. That is the crux of the issue, that how we keep borrowing theories, ideas, reform models from the global north or the Western context, and how we, plant them without much thinking, without much adaptation, and therefore, many reforms fail. Somebody has used this very strong word that Pakistan is a graveyard for reforms, for educational reforms, which is a very, strong, but, bitterly, it's true. Many reforms have come and gone without leaving any mark. Why? The reason is, we want to borrow those ideas, those neoliberal ideas, and plant them in a context which is not ready for that. So now what is the alternative? We create our own. We create our own theories. Participatory theory should, emerge from Pakistan, from the south rather than from the north, because you will see many more examples of participation here than in the north. We lived in a society where we positively depended on each other. When you go to the villages in the north and other parts of Pakistan, you still see live example of what a real participation is, participatory approach is in many areas. Collaborative learning came from Barry Bennett in Canada, and we implemented. It should have come from Pakistan, because there are so many practical example of cooperative learning, how we learn from each other. But because we didn't do research, we didn't theorize, so now it's like, we sent our raw material to another country, and then they make gold out of it, and we buy it again from them. This is how it works. So I think the way forward should be, now it's time for us to theorize ourselves, focus on ourselves, moral leadership, ethical leadership. It is very much grounded in religious ideals. How could it come from Israel or another country, but not from Middle East? So these are the broad questions we need to ponder around.
Thank you, Dr. Tajik. So that brings us to the end of today's EDU talk. So on behalf of Syed Ehsan Ali and Syed Maratib School of Education, I would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Tajik for your very insightful session today. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Tajik. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you again in our future EDU talks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your questions.